You want to step in our seat?
I don't know if I'm ever going to first and last. First and first.
As long as you don't put it behind your head, we're okay.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. It's right at time. Before we get started, Kyle, could we ask you to lead our minds in a prayer?
Lord, we come to you now in prayer, so thankful that you blessed all of us to be able to attend and be here this evening to study your word. I pray that you be with Gary at this time and help him with the thoughts and material that he's prepared, and help us to be attentive and listen to what he has brought to us, and for us to be able to encourage and strengthen one another in your word. Thank you for all that you've done for us, and ask that you bless us at this time and be with our families as well as we are away from them. It's in your son's name we pray. Amen.
Okay, I want us to... Reese, can you lower that? Because I can't talk quieter. I have to talk loud. I want us to do something a little bit different than we might normally do. I want to push us this evening to think a little bit. It's going to be a pretty introspective discussion, which is always hard. At least it is for me. But I think it's worthwhile. Really was why we studied and put it together. I'd like for us to start with reading the first 2 chapters of Job. I know I asked everybody to look over it and glance at it. I didn't do that till this morning, so you may or may not have had time to do that. It's a little bit of a lengthy reading, but it is absolutely critical to what the thoughts I want us to consider tonight. So I'd like for us to read that. I'd like to have 4 people break each chapter into 2 sections. So if you're a good, strong, loud reader, it'd be great if someone could take chapter 1, verses 1 through 12, and then somebody take 13 through 22, and then chapter 2, 1 through 10, and then the last 4 verses, 11 through 13. So anybody feeling up to, Aaron, you'll take chapter 1, verses 1 through 12.
I can be pretty loud.
That's what Charlotte said.
There was a man in the country of Uz named Job. He was a man of perfect integrity who feared God and turned away from evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. His estate included 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large number of servants. Job was the greatest man among all the people of the East. His sons used to have banquets, each at his house in turn. They would send an invitation to their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. Whenever a round of banqueting was over, Job would send for his children and purify them, rising early in the morning to offer burnt offerings for all of them. For Job thought, perhaps my children have sinned, having cursed God in their hearts. This was Job's regular practice. One day, the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord asked Satan, "Where have you come from?" "From roaming through the earth," Satan answered him, "and walking around on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? No one else on earth is like him, a man of perfect integrity, who fears God and turns away from evil." Satan answered the Lord, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Haven't you placed a hedge around him, his household, and everything he owns? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions are spread out in the land. But stretch out your hand and strike everything he owns, and he will surely curse you to your face. Very well, the Lord told Satan, everything he owns is in your power. However, you must not lay a hand on Job himself. So Satan went out from the Lord's presence. You said through 13?
No, that was it. The next person, take 13 through 22. Bobby?
Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And there came a messenger to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them. And the Sabeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. And while he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. And I alone have escaped to tell you. And while he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels, and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you. And then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. And he said, naked I come from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. And the Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong.
Okay, chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. Warren?
Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. The Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, from roaming about on the earth and walking around it. The Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil. And he still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to ruin him without cause. Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has he will give for his life. However, put forth your hand now, and touch his bone and his flesh. He will curse you to your face. So the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your power, only spare his life. Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a potsherd to scrape himself while he was sitting among the ashes. Then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity? And all this, Job did not sin with his lips.
Okay, and the last, Greg, you mind reading the last 11 through 13?
Now when Job's 3 friends heard all this adversity that had come upon him, each one came from his own place. Eliphaz from Temanite, Bildad from Shunite, and Zophar from Naamathite. For they had made an appointment together to come and mourn with him and to comfort him. And they raised their eyes from afar and did not recognize him. They lifted their voices and wept. Each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust on his head toward heaven. So they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great.
Okay, so go back to the first 5 verses. What did Job's life look like before all this started happening? How would you describe Job's life? Greg?
Very successful.
Very successful. What way? How do we know that?
Well, monetarily, as far as on that, but also spiritually.
Okay. How so? How do we know that?
He cared about his children following God. He also he came up and gave sacrifices for them just in case they had bad feelings in their hearts. So that's going over and above. I'm not sure if that was in 5.
Callan?
God said Job was righteous and blameless.
Okay. Righteous and blameless. What are some of the other things that it lists as far as his life, his everyday physical life? What are some of the things it tells us?
I can think of having everything in life, all possessions that you can possess, happiness, and all this coming to you. It could be something that could destroy you spiritually.
Yeah.
When these things happen to us, I mean, we're happy as long as we have everything all right, but when unexpectedly or something goes wrong, immediately makes me think about this man of God.
Yeah. Derek?
Verse 3, it says he was the greatest of all the men of the East.
Yeah, and I don't know how many all these camels and oxen and all that thing might have been monetarily, but it sounds like a lot to me. Sounds like a guy that wasn't looking to where his next meal was coming from, right, Shane?
Look, his family unit was very close, since his sons would hold the feast and invite the sisters, so the family was close knit, and I'm sure that he had a lot to do with that.
Okay, had a good leader in his home, spiritual leader, social leader. His family was tight. He was successful financially. Possessions, if you were to look at him, scale of 1 to 10, Job's, 9.5. He's doing pretty well. Now, the remaining verses, specifically, what were some of the things that if you're Job that you're struggling with? What all was he going through? Specifically, what were the things that were listed that he was going through and having to deal with?
9, chapter 2.
Yep.
9.
Losing those things that we find, I'm sorry, were you done?
No.
Oh, go ahead.
in verse 9, chapter 2.
Yep.
I can, if I'm going through a situation like this, your wife is to be with you, right? To encourage you, to tell you, yes, let's continue. I know this is difficult, but no, in this case, it's the opposite. She's not the
Okay.
person, she's to be, as her.
Yeah, I wrote down lost his support of his wife. His wife turned on him is what I wrote down on my list. Greg?
Besides being the spiritual security that we find, physically, the security that a lot of us put in as far as in work, both monetarily. You think about when you're trying to plan for your future and you're trying to save up, and trying to be prepared for that. A lot of people have security in the family. If something happens, my family will help take care of me. As far as he had a huge family, he had security there, and also possession-wise, he had a lot of security in things that a lot of people put faith into besides religious faith that God's going to take care of one way or the other. But he also, when you see his reaction to losing all of this, is quite amazing. Understanding for losing pretty much everything that you keep security in as far as monetarily and earthly, to have that still attitude as far as faithfully.
Yeah, I want to focus on what he lost. Okay, let me make a point. I'll be right back to you. On the what he lost. You got a guy that if you were to look around and you were in his community, this was greatest of all the men in the East. This was a guy that had it all together. Yet, within a very short period of time frame, he's dealing with, he lost all those things, those physical possessions that made him great. He lost the close-knit family, lost the wife who's turned on him. His house collapsed, so now he no longer has a home. He has no sheep, he has no oxen, he has no cattle, he has no camels, he has no son, he has no daughter, and his own physical health, to the point where he's laying there scraping himself. He's got a lot on his plate right now, right? And mentally, right? What were you going to say?
The fact that God said that he was the greatest, the most righteous person on earth. God knew, he tells us that he will allow temptation to go a certain distance with us, but there's always a way out. God knew that he wasn't going to fail. That's why he said to the devil, you do what you want to do, I know what the servant will do.
Yeah.
So God did not let him down, and he didn't let God down.
Right. Now, that's a great point. So think of it this way. Yes, sir.
Well, in the Old Testament times, the family, the close-knit family was a lot physically. You could see they would be supportive of each other. And
Yep.
besides his wife, she was the great discourager.
Yep.
The rest of his family, I'm sure they were very close-knit, just loved being together. He lost all that love of family.
Yeah. If I was Job's peer and I was living in the city that he was living in and I passed him in the marketplace, I probably would have made the comment, hey, there's Job. I mean, this guy is successful. He's got everything he needs. He's got a great home. He has great cattle. He has family. He has all these things. And now, all of a sudden, he's got a lot on his plate. Right? He's got everything around him is crumpled. So here's the introspective part. Here's what I'd like for you to do. Take a second. If you have a pen and paper, write it down maybe. If you don't, make a note on your phone or have you do it, or maybe just a mental note. But take a second and make a mental note of all of the things that you personally are struggling with. You don't have to write the words. I'm not going to show it to anybody. But just think about it. Try to be specific. This was a hard exercise for me when I went through this. Not just saying, oh, job, oh, money, oh, health, those kinds of things. I mean, specific things in your mind. And I can't believe there's any of us in here that don't have something that weighs on them. Your health, your family's health, the faith of a family member, somebody. All right, just take a second and literally, mark down, hash mark something. Make a mental note of a handful of things, 2, 3, 4, whatever you can think of, very personal, that you struggle with. Doesn't have to mean it's killing you and getting you down, but something that you struggle with that's going on in your life. It could be relationships, it could be co-workers, it could be a car that's broke down, a house that seems to be falling apart, it could be your health, it could be things about your job, security of your job, the pay that your job is, maybe you've got somebody trying to stab you in the back at work. It could be a lot of different things. But just try to be as specific as you can, things that worry you, that you're having to deal with.
Stop copying my answers, Eddie.
This is right from this next 10 minutes here was extremely difficult for me when I went through this, to be honest with myself. So now then, if you've got a couple of things, what I'd like for you to think about. Again, we're not going to exchange lists. Nobody's going to have to stand up and talk and reveal anything. I don't like that kind of stuff. But now I would say, look around this room and see who you've got sitting here. And I would challenge us that if we were to all put our names with a list in a hat, could you identify, if I picked someone at random, do you think you could identify any of those things that they put on that list? Or how many there were? And I don't mean generically, because you could say job and that could be a million things. I'm just saying, if we were challenged to do that, close my eyes and pick somebody at random, could I identify anything that's on that list? And that was the challenge, and that's what hit me as I started thinking about this. I don't know that there's some people I could, but they're not a random person. I didn't feel confident that I could do that. Well, why is that? Why is that? We're not a million people. We're a small group here. How do we normally check in with each other? When we see each other in the building, when we pass, and for a lot of us, that's where our contact is coming and going in that lobby out there, that 30 square feet out there. What are the normal things we say when we see each other?
How you doing? How's it going?
How you doing? How's it going? How do we normally respond to each other?
Great.
Great.
Fine. You? Doing well. You? Better than I deserve. And we move on. Sometimes we get really close to a really good, engaging conversation to learn about our brothers, and we say, everything okay? You buy new bullets? And when we say, is everything okay? Do we really stick around and listen for the answer, or are we already 2 steps on our way by? And if you're being asked that, and you respond with doing well, how about you? Really? Nothing in your life that you could use somebody to pray for you about. Glenn?
I have a Christian family who lives across the street from us, and when we get together in each other's home, we say, how can I pray for you? What's on your heart?
Right, and we're going to get to that. That's a really good point, because it's a lot of times the way that we phrase our interactions, right? But we walk in, how you doing? Doing good. How about you? Fine. Doing well. And we move on. And underneath there's this seed of this Job stuff going on in our lives. And we don't say a thing about it. And we don't ask about it. And we don't know about it. David?
And I think that's something that guys struggle with.
It is.
Because we want to be tough and we don't want to put anything on anybody else. I know that y'all are all dealing with stuff, so I don't want to add to your plate with my plate. So, whereas, the women, they've got their text groups with 15 people in it, and they're all talking about what's going on. And we don't do that. And Crystal's like, hey, who have you been texting? And I'm like, I know, yeah, like to Bobby's point, I know we bought ammo recently, but other than that, that's about it.
And those are things that, again, they're different. We're going to talk about a lot of that is how do we do some of these things, because it is different, because of the difference in the psychosocial aspects of it. But when somebody walks by and says, hey, how you doing? Everything okay? And you say, yeah, because on the okay part, they've already turned their head. Or you see them talking to you and you actually feel like there's somebody behind you because they're looking right over your shoulder. Who are you looking at? I'm right here. Do you really want to know? It almost has the opposite effect. You feel like, look, don't bother asking me. Don't waste the time if you don't really care. Keep moving on, right? So why is that? A lot of that, I think, is by nature. Some of it is because why would someone tell me, or why would I tell someone if I didn't want them to do something, to fix something, right? How many times your wives, those of you that are married, said, I just want you to hear me. I don't want you to fix it, but guys, we hear it, we automatically want to jump in. Well, okay, tell us what the situation is. We'll get this thing squared away. That's the way we think, right? How did Job, let's go back to looking at the Job chapter 2. Sometimes we give Job's friends a bad rap, and probably rightly so. As the book progresses, we figure out their approach to comforting Job isn't probably the best. But look at verse 12. Somebody read verse 12 and 13 again of chapter 2.
When they lifted up their eyes at a distance and did not recognize him, they raised their voices and wept. And each of them tore his robe, and they threw dust over their heads toward the sky. Did I not read the right?
Yeah, on down to 13. Yeah.
Then they sat down on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights, with no one speaking a word to him, for they saw that his pain was very great.
They didn't try to do anything at this point. They literally heard about it, cared enough to form an appointment together and go, and what did they do? They literally sat there for 7 days and 7 nights with him without anyone saying a word. Right? Hold that thought, because we're going to come back to it in the New Testament as well. Very similar situation. So as we look to the New Testament, we see passages like love one another, bear one another's burdens, forgive one another. The New Testament is full of those types of words and those types of teachings, the one another. We call them the one another's, and a lot of times we've done studies on those. It's interesting, though, with it when you look at in the English, that's 2 words, one another. And in the Greek, it's 1 word. Not exactly, I think it's alelon, pronounced like that, and it indicates a reciprocal, a mutual thing that you do for. It's something that you do not, it's not a verb, it's what's called a reciprocal pronoun. And it involves something that 2 people reciprocate in. And it's interesting as well that it's used over 100 different times in 94 different verses. 47 of those were verses that gave instructions to the followers of Christ. Paul wrote 60% of the ones that are used in that deal. It's a very important concept. So why is that? Again, let's read a couple of these. 1 Thessalonians 5:11, if someone would take that. And someone would take Galatians 2, right behind that. And then John 13, 34, and 35. Okay, so these are direct commandments. These aren't good suggestions. These are commandments. Shane, 1 Thessalonians 5:11.
Therefore, encourage one another and build up one another, just as you are doing.
Okay, encourage one another, build one another up. How do we do that? Sounds good. What does it look like? Give me an example. It's not a rhetorical question. How do we do that? How do I encourage Shane? How do I build Shane up? What does it look like?
It looks like meeting Shane's needs.
Okay.
So if he needs something from me as a brother,
Okay.
then I can meet those needs, whatever it is, whether it's a physical need or whether it's a spiritual need, or even as Job's friends, they came to him and silently sat with him. Maybe it's because they didn't know what to say, but it just accompanied.
Did you guys hear that? Everybody hear that? He met a need that Job had. To meet a need that somebody has. Could be financial, could be social, could be emotional, could be a number of things, but it's to meet a need.
You have to talk to him. You have to know what's going on in his life and know what he's struggling with.
Okay, so how do I do that?
Well, it takes being personal with him as far as that, and know what's bothering him.
Okay.
It takes taking time and actually caring and knowing what he's going through as far as that. I know one of the struggles that Shane's going through right now, and it's something that a lot of people are going through, but it's because we've talked about it, and you have to do that. You have to know what's going on.
Think by about the third verse, you're going to get where I'm headed with Shane.
Yes, and thank you, Greg, for being able to listen and help me vent and get some of that out, right? I have a situation at the house that's being difficult. I will tell you, your comments earlier about bumping into people, it's like, hey, David, how you doing? And you just kind of move on, right? Some of us are very gregarious, and we have no problem bumping into just about any brother or sister here and lightly chatting with them, right? But stepping out of your comfort zone, because most of us have, and I hate using the word clique, but you know what I'm talking about. We have a group of people that we're most comfortable with. So I'm really comfortable with Gary, and I enjoy having some in-depth conversations with him on different subjects. But I'm not with you, and I'm not with you, and it's because I don't take the time to actually try it. And I'll be honest with you, and I won't point out who it is, but somebody in the last few months, somebody that's been here, that's, if they've been this wonderful the whole rest of the time that they were here before I finally stepped out of my comfort zone and actually got to know them, I have missed out. I have a wonderful friend now that I get to chat with and do things with that was there the whole time, but I didn't take the effort to seek it out.
Yeah, and you're hitting the nail right on the head, and you're going to see this. I do want to make sure that we're getting through all these, because I've got about 6 more of those, but you're hitting it exactly right. When you think of passages, husbands, love your wives, unless it's a really hard thing. Right? Is that what it says? These are direct commandments, right? We're going to get to the part about who that is, because there's also very explicit guidance in that. Galatians 6:2. Get you right after that, Glenn. Galatians 6:2. Oh, were you wanting to read that?
Well,
Oh,
no,
okay, go ahead.
Comment is finding time to meet with people outside of church, like either going out to eat for lunch or dinner, or perhaps go to a ball game together, take an interest in part of their children's activities, and go to some of those activities. And that way you get a chance to really sit down and talk with each other. Whereas here in church, we may just, hey, hi, how you doing? And kind of go
Yeah, and this probably isn't the lobby of this place. Isn't probably the time to sit down and bare your soul to somebody.
There's no time to sit and talk.
Right. Galatians 6:2. Somebody want to grab that one? Read it.
Carry one another's burdens. In this way, you will fulfill the law of Christ.
Okay. How do I bear your burden? What does it look like?
Help someone with whatever they're.
Well, how do I know what to do? How do I know what that is? How do I know what I'm bearing? Just figuratively? The fact that I feel bad for Franco? Did I bear your burden? How do I do that? When you fall off a ladder, I come help you paint your house, maybe, right? Right? Derek?
Well, I mean, these calls have like a common thread of somewhat worldly problems the spiritual aspect being tied back to it.
Mm-hmm.
So this was talking about if you're overtaken into fault, those who were spiritual restore. 1 Thessalonians talking about that, the end of the Lord comes as a thief in the night. So comfort each other and edify one another with the fact that Christ is coming soon. Know what manner of man you're supposed to be. So there's the problem that I have, and a lot of people I think would have, is that we get ourselves caught up in worldly problems, and we don't necessarily want a spiritual solution because we're dealing with a worldly problem. And so we're sometimes so caught up in our worldly sin, and we know we need to change, but we're not really quite ready to change. And so if I come up to Eddie, he's going to have a spiritual Bible answer for me, and I don't really want that right now. I want to mope. I want to feel bad for myself for a few minutes, and then try to figure it out myself. And then when all else fails, okay, what does God have to say about it? And then we kind of get into that cycle.
Right. So let's keep moving, because we're going to really start to pull all these comments are all going to start to dovetail right into each other. John 13, 34, and 35. First one there.
A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another.
So the key on that was the second part of that. Love one another. How?
As I have loved you.
Think about that. Is that a cursory walk by? Think about the love that Christ had for us. That's my commandment, to love Bobby, Callan, Craig, Shane, Eric. That's a commandment. Yes, sir.
Building a relationship with someone as they were a close friend of yours, that they would then confide in you. Are we supposed to be brothers in Christ? My brother knows how I think, and I know how he thinks. And it's because we're so close together, although we're far apart. So we can confide in each other. So, do we do that in the congregation? Instead of just, how you doing?
Yeah.
We have to get really close together, and we do afraid to open ourselves up to talk to anybody.
Yeah, and that's the idea, but when we get to the end of this, I think what you'll see is that's not something that all of us are comfortable doing to every degree. That doesn't relieve us of the obligation. But I think what we're going to find when we get to the end of this, it doesn't have to be this in-depth outpouring for it to be effective. We saw Job's friends. What did they say? Did they come in and outpour their souls to him for 7 days? Be thinking in your mind, is there a New Testament example of something very similar? Because we're going to bring that to a point. It doesn't mean we're all answering like guys here. I got to go grab something and fix it for him. I got to go tell him something. I got to go do something for him. That was my natural reaction too. Okay, so let's look at James 5:16, and then Hebrews 10:24. James 5:16, and then Hebrews 10:24.
Therefore confess your sins to one another and pray for one another so that you may be healed. The effective prayer of a righteous man can accomplish much.
Okay, so look around this room, look at the faces, and do we do that? Either one of those. Confess things to or pray for. And if we do the pray for, it's not, are you trying to use a generic, I prayed for the men of our congregation. Is that the prayer, that everybody's all inclusive? Is that the way God looks at me? All the men on the earth, I love them all. Right? It's very specific. Pray for one another. Do we do it, and who do we do it for? I'm going to make a point of that. Any other questions before we go to the next one? Yes, sir.
Well, I think, a good example of that, would be Charlie's email tonight, that he's not going to be here. He's going to meet with a former brethren. Pray for him. And when we see our elders taking the lead in how that's supposed to look, we as the people under their leadership need to take note of that and be like-minded in that.
And we should not make assumptions. If you had seen Job, what would you have thought? That he needed your pity and his help if you had known him? Strong guy, richest, greatest of all the East? It doesn't matter who you are. You're struggling with things. Could be things of your own, could be things of your family, could be things of a congregation, could be a number of things. But we all have things that we need help with, that we struggle with. Maybe it's not a specific do something for me. Maybe it's something as simply as Job's friends did. Okay? Let's look at Hebrews 10:24.
Let us be concerned about one another in order to promote love and good works.
Okay? So if you look at another verse, it says, stir up to good works. What does that look like? How do I stir someone up to good works? There's no right or wrong answer here. There's a number of ways we can do this. What are some examples? What does that look like to stir Bobby up to good works? How do I do that? Show you by example. Okay? Graham, do you have a...
Oh, sorry. I do a point.
Oh, no.
I was just thinking of Derek's example of Charlie. I mean, is that being an example for others and doing what we need to be doing? It doesn't necessarily just need to be an elder that's doing what Charlie's doing tonight. If you are aware of a situation, you can move forward and study with a person or whatever. But it's being an example, and that encourages others.
Okay. Being an example, there's also things I can do to go and kind of push you a little bit. Hey, would you lead a song? Would you do this? Would you teach a class? Hey, you did a great job making announcements last week. Helen?
I had someone say, I'm going to do such and such, you want to come help? And I thought that was...
That's stirring one another up to do something. Oh, Reese?
When I was a younger man, much younger man, I had an older brother come to me and ask me to join him in a Bible study with two Mormons that he, got started. And that was an extremely good example, I think, of him stirring me up, because by doing that, he kind of forced me to sit down and study what it is the Mormons believe and how to defend the scriptures, and I learned and I grew tremendously during that experience. Both of us did.
Okay. Excellent. Let's look at two more passages, then we'll start kind of pointing toward the end here. 1 Peter 4:9. 1 Peter 4:9, and then Ephesians 4:25.
Show hospitality to one another without grumbling.
Show hospitality. What does that mean? Hi, everything okay? Is that hospitality? It could be in a light sense. What does hospitality look like?
If your wife talked to their
My people talk to your people. What does hospitality look like? It's got to look like something. If we don't know what it looks like, we're probably not doing it. So what does it look like?
I immediately think of having someone over,
Okay.
having someone over to your house, sharing a meal, enjoying that time together.
Okay, that's always a good example. First thing that comes into most of our minds, Mike?
I was thinking about what does the end of that say? Did I hear that without grumbling?
Without grumbling.
So, if you think about that, that's also, do everything without, grumbling and complaining. Showing hospitality without grumbling would be getting to the point, and sometimes it's hard, of thinking, oh, they've overstayed their welcome, right? You need to think about, I want to spend as much time as I can with these people, and if they want to stay longer, then I want that, right? Or whatever that is, right? It's you go beyond what you think is your limit. If they need more, right? Oh, they've eaten too much food. No, it's great. Do more. Go beyond what you are comfortable with because they need it. And that's how Jesus talked about, here's a new commandment I give you. Don't just love as you love yourself, because you have limits. Love is, I have loved you. Jesus didn't really have limits on his love. He washed their feet. He gave them himself. He died. So it's like, go beyond that.
Right? Shane?
Yeah, I think he hit something on the head. Normally we think of hospitality as like David was saying, hey, you want to come over and spend some time with us, you and your family, right? Okay, why on earth would there be grumbling in that situation? Because I'm the one that actually prompted it, right?
Right.
I think this is more of when there is a need, you need to be hospitable, and regardless of what the situation is, find a way to do it without worrying. Because sometimes some of the things that we may have done for a loved one or a friend or somebody we knew was in need probably was fairly stressful. Like it was going to put us in a little bit of a rough spot for a while. We were going to have to figure out how to make things work and make ends meet. But we need to be ready for those situations and do it also with that smile on our face and the right attitude. Because also think about the impact that has on the person that you're hospitable to, right? They could always have somebody take care of them and whine and gripe about it, right? But to see somebody go out of the way, bend over backwards, and do it with a cheerful attitude has to make an impact.
That's the thing, but if we just took that surface definition of doing things, having people over, sharing meals, be hospitable, be friendly, again, I want to challenge us. Look around this room and count mentally to yourself how many people you've done that with here. And you really want to humble yourself, grab a printed copy of our directory and go through that. And it feels like a lot, and put a check mark. And I think what most of us find is we're going to go back to the same 4 people and have 6 check marks out the side, and there's going to be a huge portion of that has no check marks by them. Eddie?
Yeah, the grumbling in that verse is really the idea of grudging or like arguing or fighting. And so it's sometimes the only time that we're going to talk to each other to try to help each other is when we got something negative to say to each other. And this verse is actually talking about doing something that's actually productive for the person. That's, promoting growth without the idea of just fighting and struggling with each other. And so that's why the hospitality thing is so important. It's because I'm actually wanting to be in fellowship with you, not be at odds with you.
Yeah, and I can tell you that, because it's happened to me, and again, this was a very convicting study as I was going through this, is there have been times when I've walked out of this building and Karen and I on the way home said, boy, something sure seemed wrong with so-and-so. They didn't seem like themselves tonight. Well, what am I telling her for? Why aren't I reaching out and calling my brother when I get home and saying, are you okay? Everything all right? Is there anything? Here's goes back to, I think it's Glenn made the comment about the praying, about asking. We tend to say, and again, sometimes it's as easy as reframing the question. Instead of saying, is there anything I can pray for you about? Well, now that leaves the burden up on me to share something. Instead of coming back and saying, what can I pray for you about? Now then, there's that assumption. I'm not saying making you have to pick something like that. Saying, how can I pray for you? Not, is there something? Like, because you're afraid to say, well, if there is, I must be weak. There's something wrong with me. Eric, did you have a hand?
If you look at the word hospitable, what is that? We call a hospital. What is it? You go there sick. You can hardly move. But these people looking after you, being hospitable. You can do nothing, but they're looking after you, they're serving you, they're helping you. And I think if we look at being hospitable in that way towards other people, Jesus said, don't go and help somebody expecting a return help. The help you give must be so that they cannot return the help. So, to me, that's being hospitable, looking after people who can't do anything for themselves, for you for them.
Right. So Orrin, and then I'll quickly, then I want to move on because we're about 15 minutes left.
It's just interesting. Some of the synonyms that I was looking up of hospital is talking about, yes, accommodating, so meeting someone's needs, but it's also generous and liberal. And I know for many of us, we take liberal as, that's the worst word you can say. But it's overabundant.
I'm going to quote Nathan and say 2 more, and then I'm going to move on for the sake of time. Sometimes you have to keep moving. Greg?
I think as men, we focus on, let me fix this problem.
Yep.
And when it comes to our own problems, we try to fix them ourselves. I've heard a whole lot about reaching out to your brother, but the opposite side of that, I think, is more important. If you don't have somebody in this room that you're able to talk to when you are going through struggles, and you're thinking to yourself, why aren't these people helping me when I'm down? A lot of it, they don't know. And you could go up to somebody 10 times and say, how are you? And get the same, oh, I'm doing good, everything's fine. A lot of times that is correct because we're wanting to focus on the good side of things and not the,
Yeah.
the
Perfect segue.
But the big thing is when you're bearing someone's burdens, a big part of that is allowing somebody else to help you bear your burden. And if you're not doing that, you're missing out on one of the biggest things that church is
I would
about.
say it's even more important than that. And we're a couple of passages, and then we're going to read a passage that shows how important that is. But there are other ones that say, comfort one another concerning the resurrection in 1 Thessalonians 4. Serve one another. Be subject to one another. Exhort one another. There's a whole bunch of these things that we're commanded to do. Who is our one another? Who's responsible for doing that? Was in the segue there. Who is responsible? Whose responsibility is it to do this? I would suggest to you it's not just go find somebody and do that. It's two-sided. I have a responsibility to stop long enough to hear and engage my brother and learn something about him and know what's on their mind and their heart. And I don't have to fix it. There's other things I can do to encourage, exhort, and comfort. A lot of things I can do outside of fixing their problems. My job is not to take a full-time fix-it man job and go around fixing people. It's not my job. So there's a lot of other things. But the flip side of that is I have a direct responsibility to let myself out and answer those questions. And I'll tell you why. Somebody read the Ephesians 4:25. Ephesians 4:25.
Therefore, putting away lying, let each one of you speak truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another.
So you can redefine the words if you don't like what they mean, I guess. That's what our culture does. But lying is not speaking the truth. And we should not be, we're told to speak the truth to each other. So let's be very clear that if somebody's asking me, everything fine? Yeah, all fine. Was that the truth? I have a responsibility to be honest with you. It doesn't mean I have to pour everything. Yeah, I'm struggling with a few things. I can tell you that in the last few months, there have been people specifically, it kind of caught me off guard when I asked. But there's certain people in this congregation that I have different relationships with and very clearly don't mind. I'm struggling with a couple of things. The same old thing, my foot's still hurting, my job's lost, whatever those things are. They're not dumping out their dirty laundry everywhere, but they're letting me know, yeah, there's some things I'm struggling with. Man, I'm not feeling too good lately. My mother's, passed away. There'll be different things. We can be involved and know those things, and I don't have to fix it all. But if I'm constantly putting up this wall saying, no, everything's fine, I'm telling you, I'm not being truthful with you. And if you're not being truthful, what is that called? Lying. Calvin?
Honestly, I think part of the problem was we probably have to quit lying to ourselves. So.
Absolutely. So as we look around this room, look at the directory, who do we do that for? Now, we're not expected, I'm not saying you go out and stand on the street corner and do this, but when I start saying, who is that person? Who is it I'm supposed to encourage? Were you raising your hand?
Yeah, needs come in various flavors. It's not limited to Christ mentioning being hungry or thirsty or being naked. He was using very common problems back in that time, but he was using it as an example. If Christ was sitting here tonight and he asked you for a glass of water, I'm confident you would make it very quickly to the water fountain or whatever to come and bring him water. But he's saying, when you do that to your brethren, it's as if you are, in fact, it's a very basic example. blood. You're actually doing that to Christ. It's not just for the person who's doing it on others.
Right. You know, it's very natural, too, that we all have closer relationships, just personalities and things, and our demographics and lifestyles are similar. It's natural. We have different hobbies, maybe some similar interests. There's nothing wrong with that. But is our service, are these commandments limited to that? Does that absolve me of any of the other people? Just because I'm closer to Shane or closer to David, or several of us text about ammo and things like that. Does that absolve me? I'm doing it for 4 people. Isn't that enough? I'm not comfortable with the rest of them. So who is it that I'm supposed to? So if you turn over to Luke chapter 10. Luke chapter 10, there's a lawyer having a conversation, and it leads to a parable. What is the parable? Luke chapter 10, toward the latter part of it, starting like around verse right after 29, 33, something like that? What's the parable he teaches? Okay, so what's the question that is asked?
Who is my neighbor?
Who is my neighbor? Because he was told to do what?
Love your neighbor as yourself.
Well, who is my neighbor? These 4 guys, I got it covered. Was that his answer? Was that the answer? So it's not, if we're saying, I'm comfortable with Eric, I'm comfortable with David, man, there's this other guy sits over here, okay, that doesn't absolve me. It's not wrong that I don't have a closer relationship. That doesn't absolve me of the commandments to do that. If I'm asking who is my neighbor, who should I be doing that with, I'm already showing I've got the wrong heart in this thing, right? Questions before we go on. We're coming to a real quick close here. We've got about 7 minutes left. Let's go back and think about Job's friends. So what did they do again in verses 11 through 13 of chapter 2 when they came in? Did they sit down? Did they go and try to start rebuilding a house and start giving him more oxen? What did they do? They simply sat there, right? So flip over to the New Testament, Matthew 26, 36 through 46. Somebody with a good, strong voice. Matthew 26, verses 36 through 46.
Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane, and said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And he took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, and he began to be grieved and distressed. Then he said to them, "My soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch with me." And he went a little beyond them and fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping, and said to Peter, "So, you men could not keep watch with me for 1 hour? Keep watching and praying, so you will not enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." He went away again a second time and prayed, saying, "My Father, if this cannot pass away unless I drink it, your will be done." Again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. And he left them again, and went away and prayed a third time, saying the same thing once more. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. Behold, the one who betrays me is at hand."
To me, that's a perfect example of the same thing. He wasn't asking them to fix anything. Didn't ask them to stop what was coming. In fact, at the first, he didn't even open up as to what all it was. What did he ask them to do? Just sit here. And he comes back an hour later after he's praying, and he says, "You fell asleep? Could you not just sit here with me?" I mean, think about what he was going through, and just the fact that the comfort of having a brother, a friend sitting there with you, doesn't have to do anything. I can tell you that just recently, when Karen and I had the virus, I mean, there were numerous people that reached out, and there was nothing they could do. We didn't need anything. We had the food we needed. We had all this, but they simply said, "Just wanted to check on you. Just let you know we were here, thinking about you today." Something as simple as that. I tell you, it moved me to tears because I knew I had people that cared. Didn't need their help. Didn't need food. Didn't need my laundry done. But I had a brother or a sister that said, "Thinking about you." just ask to sit with me for a little bit. And they couldn't do it. They kept falling asleep. And he come back and said, look, I cannot believe you cannot sit here with what I'm going through, and you didn't care enough to just sit here and stay awake and be with me. Derek?
We see two different reactions to sorrow. And in Job's example, they saw him from afar off, didn't recognize him, and they wept. And their reaction to that pain and sorrow they saw their brother in was to sit and be with him. The disciples, on the other hand, in the other examples it talks about them, they fall asleep because they were sorrowful. And they're instead of sitting and being there as a comfort to Jesus, their reaction to their sorrow was to turn it inside, and they just went away and fell asleep. So you see two different reactions to the same kind of example.
Yeah, and I guess my premise out of all this, as I was studying this, is all of these commandments that we go through, they're not suggestions. They're not limited to only places where I'm comfortable. They're commandments, and I'm commanded to do them. And I have an obligation to reach out. And there's no way I can encourage you if I have no idea what's going on in your life. There's no way that I can pray for you unless I know you and know that you're struggling with something. Or maybe it's a generic prayer. I don't have to know all the details. I can just say, hey, my brother's struggling tonight, God, and I hope you be with him and help him with whatever it is he's working through. Just like Charlie's email, I think somebody brought that up. There was no specific mention, but just saying, look, Charlie, we're praying for you. And I tell you, it's even harder for people, I think, I'm speaking for you, Eddie and Charlie, because we tend to look at them if they've got that under control. They're the leaders. They're the Job. They're there. They have this. They don't need ours. How often do we stop and say, you must be carrying an immense burden. Appreciate your leadership. We love you. We pray for you daily. Whatever that is. You don't have to fix anything for him. Let him know that you're thinking about him. And we ought to be doing that for each other. And if I'm asking, who do I have to do it for? How many people? Then our heart's in the wrong place to begin with. And we ought to be looking deeper than that. But it doesn't have to be a fix. It can simply be letting each other know that I also have the responsibility that when my brothers ask and check on me, I need to be able to say, I'm not feeling, I've got some stress at work right now I'm really struggling with. I'm worried about, retiring or not having a job or whatever it is. You don't have to get into the dirty details. But let them know that, there's a couple of things you could pray. I sure would appreciate it. Warren?
Another lesson that at least has been on my mind, especially since you brought this up in the example of Job's friends, who are the ones that are helping you? Because on the flip side of that is thinking about how we may not reach out to our brethren. I've been very thankful that in my workplace, the people I work with, and especially the leaders, are actually really good at making sure we're reaching out to each other to let each other know whenever we have faults. So to me, this is hitting me that, I'm with people at work and I'm willing to open up with them, but then my own brethren, I'm not saying as much, just, hey, how you doing? And thinking with Job too, that his friends did, yes, at the beginning, they sat with him, but then you go on the next few chapters and it's chapter after chapter after chapter. Well, Job, you did something wrong, so what is it? Why are you not? What's your problem? So it's choosing who we do speak to outside in the world versus our own brethren.
So I would just say, as we kind of draw to a close here, is do a mental look around again and think about that list that you made, whether you physically wrote it or not, or you mentally made it. Look around this room and just, on your way home tonight, think about someone that's not in your immediate 3-foot range of your personal circle and say, okay, I got this picture of this person. I think I could very easily tell you at least 3 of the 4 things they wrote on that list. Could you get one? Could you even guess how many were on there? Could you get within, this far of it? Do you have any idea? And if not, take that as a challenge to say, I'm going to start asking different questions. I'm going to make sure I ask and check. Maybe it's just a short text. It doesn't have to be some long, sit-down, psychological session or anything. It can just be something thinking about you. You looked a little down. I know you hadn't been feeling well. I know your kids having trouble. I know your floors are torn up. You've been living without floors in your house, Shane. Little things like that, just to let your brothers know that you're connected. And when someone asks you, I would challenge you to find a way, without dumping all your problems at their feet, to let them know that, yeah, I'm struggling with a little something. Maybe there's not every time, but there's got to be something, sometime in your life. Let's just be more open with each other. And I think when we do that, that's when the love of Christ is made manifest in us. And that's when people see that example. But I tell you, I can't do it if I have no idea who you are. I don't know where you work. I don't know what sport you play. I don't know what your hobbies are. I don't know what your challenges are. I don't know what country you came from. It's really hard for me to build you up and be there if I have no idea who you are, because I see you 3 minutes passing this 30 square foot. Mike?
That's exactly what I was thinking, though, is Jesus and Job, and really for us too, when somebody goes through, and let's think of the extreme of somebody going through cancer, right? Or even just smaller stuff, like just any everyday stuff, is they wouldn't know how Jesus was going to go through that. They're not be on that same level. If we have never had cancer, we can't know what they're going through, right? So even on the smaller levels of, I don't know what hobbies you have, we don't have a lot in common. That doesn't matter, right? What matters is the outpouring of love. I'm here for you, whatever you need, right? They wouldn't know what Jesus is going through. They couldn't. Jesus was the only perfect sacrifice, and the only one knowing that. Job only went through that. They didn't.
Yeah, I had my last kind of personal story, then we'll close. We'll ask for last comments. During this whole COVID thing, I haven't been sick. I hadn't been to a doctor 15 years. I probably shouldn't be saying that on camera. But I just don't go. I'm just not sick. But so this whole COVID thing that we went through really taught me some lessons. And I had one particular brother here that literally was, texting me every 2-3 days, begging, there's got to be something I can do. Got to be. There's something I can bring. I feel helpless. Tell me what I can do. And I kept saying, nothing. We got it. We have food. No. And just, and he kept going. He kept going. And I didn't think anything about it other than it really moved me that this person cared that much, even though I didn't need anything. But the point is, following that, once we started feeling better, there was someone else that was going through that same thing. And I texted a couple of times just to check. It's like, I'm going to repay this. So I texted a couple of times. And I said, do you need anything? And they actually said, it'd be great if you could swing by like Chick-fil-A and drop it off on our front porch because we can't get out. And I was excited because I was like, he let me do something. And then I thought, oh man, I didn't let my brother do something when he was trying to call me. It wasn't that they needed it or I needed it. It's he let me serve him, and I was excited and happy, and I got Karen in the car, and we were excited, and we drove and got Chick-fil-A and left it on the doorbell and rang and, ditched, just like a little kid, and left Chick-fil-A on the deal. But again, that's what comes from letting people help each other. Let someone help you, help someone else. And we do that, we go back to, and so fulfill the law of Christ. That was the point. Final questions, thoughts?
Stuck to me was about being hospitable. And when I was first thinking about it, I was like, you don't have to just be hospitable in your own home. You can make someone else feel at home. Right. And then all of this, it kind of, the idea of what roles do we fit in? Part of showing love for my brother and for reaching out and connecting that way is acting like I'm a host and you're a guest in my home. And I want to see to your needs. But the flip side of that is a polite guest doesn't refuse food and drink when I offer it time after time. If I come by and say, hey, can I get you a glass of water? Hey, are you comfy? Hey, can I get you a snack? And you're just, I'm fine. That, we think of that as being a rude guest. And so just, it can be something little, it can be something small. I mean, with the Samaritan, the guy on the side of the road, big obvious problems. But sometimes if we just look at, okay, what's the most obvious thing I can do for a brother? I can always pray. I can always pray for them. It can be something little and small and easy that we can do to start forging those connections.
Yeah, and we don't often, when we think about the Good Samaritan, we don't often pass by a road and see somebody laying there beat up and destitute. That doesn't happen, although I'm not saying it couldn't. But how often do we walk in one double set of doors, immediately shake a hand, and walk right past 3 other people going to another person to shake a hand. What was wrong with those 2? They don't count. They're not within this. Who is my neighbor? Do we pass by on the other side of the road? Which one of those in the Good Samaritan example went home justified? Which one? The one that stopped and did something and didn't even know who the guy was. In fact, probably shouldn't have been talking to him to begin with. So those are the things I just want us to think about. And again, this was very convicting for me as I studied, that I'm not doing nearly as much outside of my little comfort circle of my squad. And that's not enough. That wasn't the intent of God in these instructions, I don't believe, in these commandments. So thank you for the comments. Hopefully it was helpful. Think about it on the way home a little bit. If it strikes a chord and it makes you mad, then maybe we did our job, because it made me mad at myself when I did it. So if there's no other questions, we'll close with a prayer. And Callan, do you mind leading our minds in it?
Dear God, our Heavenly Father, Lord, you are so good and so kind. And we realize the love that you have for us has no boundaries. We pray, Lord, that we might learn from you. Take your word and your example and apply it in our lives. And help us to stir one another up to good works. Please be with us, Father. Watch over us and keep us. It's in your Son's name that we pray.